Little girl knocked and said, "They beaten my mama. She's dying." The words tore through the rain like a bullet through glass. It was near sundown on Hollow Creek Ranch, the horizon a smear of rust and violet, when the small, trembling figure appeared at the great wooden door. The storm had been growling for hours, its temper swelling over the plains, but nothing in all its fury compared to the look in that child's eyes. Elias Granger, the ranch's towering owner, a man both feared and respected across 3 counties, had just returned from the fields. His boots were caked in mud, his face shadowed with years of solitude and something darker, something unspoken. When he opened the door, the sight before him made his heart stumble. The girl couldn't have been more than 8. Barefoot, soaked through, hair tangled with rain, she clutched at the torn hem of her dress as if it were all she owned in the world. And her eyes, wide, glassy, and desperate, locked on his. "They beaten my mama," she whispered again, voice trembling. "She's dying." For a moment silence, the kind that makes the air itself feel heavy. Then Elias's jaw tightened. "Where?" was all he asked. She pointed east, toward the distant line of cottonwoods beyond the ridge, toward the outlaw cabins that everyone in town avoided after sundown. No one went there anymore, not after the raid that had left 2 men dead and half the valley burning 3 winters ago. Elias knew the place too well. It was where his past still lingered, a past he'd been trying to bury beneath acres of land and silence. Without a word, he lifted the child into his arms, wrapped his coat around her small shoulders, and whistled for his horse. The storm swallowed them whole. The cabin lay broken in the trees, its roof half collapsed, its windows black with soot. Lightning flickered across the clearing, revealing the faint trail of smoke from a dying fire. And there, against the far wall, lay a woman. She wasn't moving. Elias's boots thudded against the wooden floor as he knelt beside her. She was bruised, her lips split, blood dark against her pale skin. Yet beneath all that ruin was something startling. A face that had once been gentle, lovely, and proud. A woman's hand, trembling faintly, moved toward the little girl who'd followed Elias in. "Clara," the woman breathed, her voice no louder than the rain. "She's here," Elias said quickly. "You're safe now." Her eyes flickered open, slow and glassy, but the moment they found his face, they widened, not in fear, but recognition. "You, Elias Granger." He froze. The name on her lips was one he hadn't heard spoken with that kind of memory in years. "You know me?" he asked, almost softly. The woman coughed, blood glinting at the corner of her mouth. "We met once, long ago, the harvest fair. You helped my father when his wagon broke. You said—" her breath hitched. "You said there were still good men left in this country." Elias felt something twist in his chest, an ache he didn't understand. He lifted her carefully into his arms, the child watching with tears streaking her cheeks. "No one's dying here," he said firmly, though the tremor in his voice betrayed him. "Not tonight." By dawn, the woman's fever had broken. Elias had brought her and the child back to Hollow Creek, laying her in the spare room of the ranch house, a room untouched since his sister's passing years ago. He sat beside her through the night, wiping her brow, keeping the fire alive. The house, long, quiet, and hollow, now seemed to breathe again, filled with the small sounds of life. The girl's soft sobs, the crackle of wood, the woman's labored breaths. When the first light crept through the window, Elias finally saw her clearly. Her name, he learned later, was Mara Callan. She'd been living out by the ridge with her daughter Clara, working as a seamstress for the lumbermen and travelers. Her husband, a drunkard and gambler, had vanished months ago, leaving her to fend for herself. But when one of the men from the camps came calling and she refused him, they'd made an example of her. That was what Clara had run from. That was what brought her to Elias's door. He didn't speak much that morning. Elias never did. But he worked with quiet precision, preparing broth, tending the horses, checking on his workers. Yet no matter what he did, his mind returned to the woman in the upstairs room. The fragile sound of her breathing, the way her hand had brushed her daughter's cheek even as she drifted in and out of fevered sleep. Something about it unsettled him. Something human, raw, and too close to what he'd long buried. By the third day, Mara could sit up. Her face, though bruised, had softened with rest. She watched from the window as Elias saddled his horse. The vast plains stretched beyond, golden under the morning sun, dotted with the silhouettes of cattle and distant riders. The sight might have seemed peaceful to another, but she could sense the weight in it. This was a man who carried ghosts. "Mr. Granger," she said quietly when he passed her door. He turned, tipping his hat. "You should be resting." "I will. I just wanted to thank you for saving us." Elias shifted, uncomfortable under the sincerity in her voice. Anyone would have done the same. But they both knew that wasn't true. That evening, as the sun dipped low and the lanterns flickered against the wooden beams, Clara sat at the kitchen table drawing with a blunt pencil. Elias was near the hearth, mending a bridle strap, his broad hands moving with surprising gentleness. The sound of the girl humming filled the room, an old lullaby, off-key but sweet. Mara stepped quietly into the doorway, watching them. There was something in that moment, the way the golden light framed them both, the way Elias looked up when he realized she was there. That felt almost like home, almost like a life that could have been. "Clara seems happy here," Mara said softly. "She's a strong little thing," Elias replied. "Reminds me of someone I knew once." Mara smiled faintly. "Your wife?" The question struck him like a stray spark. He looked away, jaw tight. "No, my sister. She passed before her time." The silence that followed was tender, fragile as glass. Outside, the crickets sang. Inside, something began to shift. Slow, hesitant, but unmistakable. The beginning of a bond born not from romance, but from mercy. The kind of mercy that heals what time and cruelty had broken. Mara didn't yet know how much she'd changed the course of that lonely rancher's life, or how her own would soon be caught in the storm of it. For now, there was only the soft crackle of the fire, the warmth of safety, and the faint hope that maybe, just maybe, the world still held a little kindness. But in the shadows beyond Hollow Creek, men were whispering. The ones who had hurt her weren't done yet, and the peace she'd found beneath Elias Granger's roof was about to be tested by blood and fire. The first signs of spring came early that year, a pale warmth drifting over the valley, softening the last traces of winter frost. Hollow Creek Ranch stirred back to life, its cattle grazing deeper into the plains, the air heavy with the scent of earth and wild clover. Yet beneath the promise of new seasons, a quiet tension lingered, something unseen, circling like a hawk above calm water. Mara Callan could feel it every time the wind shifted, every time Elias Granger rode out before dawn with that rifle slung across his back. He said it was for the herd, for coyotes, for rustlers, but she knew better. It had been 3 weeks since the night Clara had found him, and though the bruises on Mara's face had faded, the unease in her heart had not. The men who had hurt her, the ones from the ridge, were still out there. And in a land ruled more by pride than law, mercy was often a mistake. Mara had taken to helping around the house, unable to sit idle. Her hands, once known for stitching fine lace, now scrubbed floors and folded linens. She even learned to bake bread in the old stone oven, something she'd never done before, just to repay kindness with work. Clara, bright-eyed and blooming again, followed Elias wherever he went, her laughter echoing through the stables like a song the house hadn't heard in years. And Elias, that tall, silent man with a scar down his left cheek, began to change in ways no one could quite name. He smiled more, though barely. He spoke softer, though still few words, and sometimes in the quiet hours between dusk and dark, Mara caught him standing by the porch railing, looking toward the ridge, as if he could sense danger drawing closer, or perhaps the memory of something he could never forget. There was a sadness about him that she couldn't name, one that mirrored her own. One evening, a letter came from town. The mail rider, red-faced from dust, handed it to Elias with a muttered, "Urgent." He didn't open it at first, just turned it over in his hands, staring at the wax seal. It bore the mark of Sheriff Dalton, the same man who had once served with Elias during the border wars. Mara watched from the kitchen doorway as he finally broke it open. The message was brief, but its weight was clear. 2 men seen riding from the ridge. Colin woman's name mentioned in the saloon. Thought you ought to know. Elias folded the letter slowly, his jaw set. "They're back," he said under his breath. Mara felt the color drain from her face. "What do they want?" His eyes met hers, sharp, steady, unflinching. "To finish what they started." He turned, reaching for his coat, but she stepped forward, clutching his sleeve. "Please, don't go after them. They'll kill you." Elias stopped, his expression unreadable. "I've been dead a long time, Mara. You and that little girl just reminded me what it feels like to breathe again." Then, before she could answer, he left. The night stretched long and sleepless. Mara sat by the fire, Clara curled up against her lap. The house creaked and sighed with the wind, every sound sharpening her nerves. When the knock finally came, hard, heavy, deliberate, her heart nearly stopped. It wasn't Elias. "Mara Callan," a voice slurred from outside. "You think you can hide behind that man forever?" Two shadows moved past the window, one carrying a lantern, the other a rifle. "Come out now, sweetheart," the voice sneered. "We just want a little talk." Mara rose, trembling, clutching Clara to her. The air in the room seemed to freeze. Then from the dark beyond the door came the sound of boots crunching against gravel. And another voice. "Low and cold as steel. You boys picked the wrong house. Elias." The next moments came in flashes. The sharp crack of gunfire, the flare of the lantern shattering, the echo of Clara's scream. Mara pulled her daughter down behind the hearth as bullets splintered wood around them. Through the haze of smoke and panic, she saw Elias's silhouette in the doorway, broad, unyielding, returning fire with deadly precision. When the chaos broke, silence fell heavy over the plains once more. One man fled into the dark. The other lay still in the mud. Elias stood motionless for a long while, breathing hard, rain beginning to fall again in soft, steady sheets. Then he turned back toward the house, toward Mara, who had sunk to her knees, shaking. "You're safe now," he said quietly, but she could see it in his eyes, the cost of what he'd done. The shadow of his past stirred awake once more, and somehow she knew it wasn't over. Days later, when the sheriff's men came to collect the body and track the one who'd escaped, Hollow Creek Ranch fell eerily still again. Elias avoided Mara's gaze, spending his hours out in the fields, mending fences that didn't need fixing. He spoke to no one. He smiled at nothing. Mara tried to thank him, to find the words, but none seemed enough. Until one evening, as the sun bled across the horizon, she finally walked out to him. "You saved us again," she said softly. Elias didn't look up. "You shouldn't have needed saving in the first place." "But we did," she whispered. "And you were there." For a long moment, only the wind answered. Then finally he turned, and she saw something raw in his expression, something she hadn't seen before. Fear, not of death or danger, but of the feeling he'd tried to bury since the day his sister died, the feeling of wanting someone to stay. "Mara." His voice cracked. "You and Clara don't belong in a place like this. There's still time to leave, before those men send more." She stepped closer, shaking her head. "We've run enough, Elias. I'm tired of running." "And Clara?" She laughs again here. Don't take that from her. He looked away as if her words were more than he could bear. "This land's cursed with me. Anyone who stays ends up hurt. Then let's face the curse together," she said simply. Something broke in him then, quiet, unseen. But she felt it all the same. He turned slightly, the last light of dusk painting his profile in gold. And though he said nothing more, she knew she had reached him. That night, Mara sat by the fire while Clara slept upstairs. She thought of how fate had brought them to that door, through storm and fear, through cruelty and chance. And for the first time in years, she felt something she hadn't dared to feel. Hope. Outside, the wind whispered through the grass. Elias stood on the porch, staring toward the ridge once more. He could still see movement in the distance, faint, flickering. A lone rider, perhaps, or maybe the last ghost of the past refusing to rest. Either way, he knew the fight wasn't finished, but this time, he wasn't standing alone. The night they came again. The moon was a pale coin in a restless sky. Wind moaned through the plains like a warning, rattling the windows and bending the dry grass flat against the earth. The storm that had once brought Mara to Hollow Creek had returned, not of rain this time, but of vengeance. Elias Granger had known this day would come. He had seen it in the quiet tracks near the north fence. The missing cattle, the smoke on the ridge. He had smelled it on the wind, the scent of men who carried whiskey and cruelty in equal measure. When the dogs began to bark, he didn't hesitate. He moved through the house with the surety of a man who had lived through too many nights like this before. He loaded his rifle, checked the revolver at his hip, and glanced toward the stairs, toward the room where Mara and Clara slept. But Mara was already awake. She stood in the doorway, shawl pulled tight, eyes wide with understanding. "They're coming, aren't they?" she whispered. Elias nodded once. "You and Clara stay upstairs. No lights, no sound. Whatever happens, and you wait." But she stepped forward, voice trembling. "You can't face them alone." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and something in his chest broke. For all the storms he had weathered, this woman's fear, this quiet bravery, undid him more than any bullet ever could. "I ain't alone," he said finally. "You gave me something to fight for again." The first shots cracked through the silence like thunder. Glass shattered. The barn went up in flames. Clara screamed from the upper floor as the blaze painted the sky red. Elias fired back, every shot clean, deliberate. His figure was carved in shadow, a man standing against everything that had ever tried to break him. The outlaws circled like wolves, shouting curses, firing wild. But Hollow Creek was his land, and he knew every inch of it. Mara dragged Clara beneath the stairs, shielding her with her body as smoke began to fill the air. The little girl clung to her mother's dress, whispering prayers between sobs. Each gunshot made her flinch, each silence worse than the last. And then, a sound she feared most. The crash of the front door. A man stumbled inside, his face half lit by the fire's glow, one of the same devils from the ridge. His grin was twisted, his eyes burning with hate. "Well now," he drawled. "Ain't this cozy?" Mara froze, pulling Clara close, but before he could lift his weapon, a shadow moved behind him. Elias struck hard, the butt of his rifle slamming into the man's skull. He fell with a thud, and for a breathless second, all was still again, until another bullet tore through the window and caught Elias in the shoulder. He staggered, gritting his teeth, blood darkening his shirt. Mara rushed to him, hands trembling. "You're hit." He shook his head, forcing her toward the stairs. "Take Clara, get to the cellar, now!" "I won't leave you." "You will," he barked, voice breaking. Then softer. "Please. I can't lose you too." For a moment their eyes met, two souls bound by the cruel mercy of fate. Then she turned, gathering Clara in her arms, vanishing into the smoke-filled stairwell. Outside, the world burned. The barn collapsed in a roar of fire, sparks spilling into the night like falling stars. The outlaws' shouts grew fainter, fewer. Elias's bullets found their marks one by one, until the valley fell silent again, save for the crackle of flame and the rasp of his own breathing. When the sheriff's riders arrived at dawn, they found the ranch half in ashes, and Elias Granger sitting on the porch steps, his arm bound with torn cloth, rifle across his knees. Two bodies lay out by the corral. The third was gone, vanished into the hills with the night. Mara emerged from the cellar, Clara clutching her hand. Her dress was smudged with soot, her hair wild, but her eyes, those steady, unbroken eyes, met his and didn't waver. "It's over," she whispered. Elias shook his head faintly. "Not yet. There'll be more trouble from their kind. Then we'll face it," she said, "together." He looked at her then, the dawn catching her face in soft gold. Something eased in him, something he had held too tight for too long. He reached for her hand, rough fingers brushing against hers. "I spent years thinking I didn't deserve peace," he said quietly. "But maybe peace ain't something you earn. Maybe it's something you protect." She smiled, small, trembling, but real. "And you've protected enough, Elias. Let someone take care of you now." He let out a long breath, and for the first time in years it sounded like release. Weeks passed. Spring settled over Hollow Creek again, wildflowers blooming where the fire had scorched the land. The barn was rebuilt, the fences mended, and laughter, Clara's laughter, returned to the air like a promise kept. Sometimes, in the evenings, Mara would sit on the porch with her sewing, watching Elias work the fields. His shoulder still ached, but he moved with a quiet strength, the strength of a man no longer running from ghosts. One evening, as the sun dipped low, He came up to her with that rare, almost shy smile. "You and Claire have made this place feel alive again," he said. "It was always alive," she replied softly. "It just needed someone to remember how to love it." He looked at her for a long while, the golden light flickering between them. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small silver locket, tarnished, worn with age. "It was my sister's," he said. "She'd want someone like you to have it." Mara opened it gently. Inside, where the photo should have been, was a tiny pressed sprig of lavender. She blinked back tears. "Thank you, Elias." He hesitated, then said, "I ain't much for words, but I reckon I know when something feels right." She smiled through the shimmer of tears, setting the locket against her heart. "So do I." And when he leaned closer, cautious, uncertain, but full of quiet devotion, the whole wide valley seemed to hush around them. The fire, the pain, the loneliness of years past, all of